Hello and welcome to the Locala Talking Sense Sensory Needs and Toileting presentation. We recommend that you watch Talking Sense 1 to 4 before watching this presentation. This will provide you with the background information on sensory processing needed to gain the most out of this unit. So in the sensory needs and toileting unit, we're going to be talking about the following things. So how sensory needs make using the toilet difficult, and this might be because of difficulty noticing or making sense of information and sensation from inside the body. It might be issues to do with movement and balance that arise from sensory need. It could be because children have got reduced body awareness, or maybe they've got smell sensitivity or noise sensitivity, or even touch sensitivity. And again, children who've got coordination difficulties quite often struggle with the process of managing their clothing, with cleaning themselves, all of that sort of thing, and that can make using the toilet difficult. And again, as we've talked earlier about children who have anxiety arising from sensory needs, that can also disrupt the toileting process. So we were talking about all of these different aspects of sensory needs that make toileting difficult, and then we'll be thinking about what we can do to help these children. I think it's just really important to point out here that if you've got, if your child's got really significant medical needs around using the toilet, so if they've got really severe constipation, this needs to be sorted out and addressed first. So please make sure that you see your GP, or if you're getting support from the continence service, please make sure that you speak to them first. And I think the key point here, as with all of these targeted units, is just to remember that every child's sensory needs are different. And again, a lot of what works really goes with personal preference. So all of the things that we suggest here might not work for your child. It's very much going to be a case of trial and error. So just to keep that in mind. So thinking first about inner senses and toileting. So children who under-respond to the information from their inner senses often don't notice messages from their bladder or bowel and that they're full unless this is a really, really strong message, and they haven't got very much time to do something about it, or they might not notice this message at all. And the other problem that can affect toileting with difficulty noticing messages from the inner senses is if children don't feel thirsty, and so they're not drinking enough, because quite often if you don't drink enough, this can lead to constipation, and this can make toileting difficult. So again, key point here, not drinking enough often leads to constipation, and then when you're constipated, it can make it quite painful to poo, and then that can make your child really anxious because they're worried it's going to hurt, so they don't want to go to the toilet, so they hold it in, and that makes them more constipated. It makes it hurt more, and it leads to a negative cycle. So what can be done to help? So if you remember from Unit 3, we talked about heavy muscle work and how this has a really organising effect on all of the senses. It makes us more aware of our body, both how we're moving and also the inside of the body as well. So that can help us to process information from the inner senses more effectively. The other thing that can be really helpful as well is completing a regular mindfulness body scan. So lying and paying attention to each bit of your body and at a time, and the more you do this, the more children will find it easier to feel different parts of their body and to tune into it naturally without having to think about it. So what else can be done to help? Really important, as we said, because of the fact that not drinking enough leads to constipation, to make sure that your child has a regular intake of fluids throughout the day. So regular intake of fluids and a set toilet schedule throughout the day, so that they know when to expect to have a drink and they know when they're going to the toilet. If this is something that's difficult for older children, particularly maybe if they're at high school and they're having to manage some of this themselves, you can get special watches that can be programmed with a really discreet alarm just to remind children that it's time to go to the toilet. And the continence charity called ERIC sells these watches. There's information in the resource slide at the end of this presentation. And again, at home, things like smartphones, tablets, Alexa, or other smart speakers can all be used to try and set prompts and reminders throughout the day. And again, you can always just use a visual timetable. It doesn't have to be something very technological. The other thing that can be helpful is for some children, if they don't feel thirsty, they don't see why they need to drink. So having things like social stories, just to remind them of why it's important, why they need to drink, because for a lot of children, they need a logical explanation about why they need this, even if they don't feel it. The other thing that you can do as well, if they're not feeling the sensation. Maybe they can see that they need to drink more. So using something like either a smart scale, and again, you're getting more and more of these now that are a bit cheaper to buy and that actually measure your hydration levels as well. So children can look and see that they need to drink more. Or again, it doesn't have to be something fancy. You can always use a water bottle that's got markings on it, and there's quite a lot available on the market that have got markings. Or you can just put your own on just to remind them of how much they need to drink throughout the day. So I want to think next about children who are really sensitive to movement, and just a small movement to them feels very, very big, and they've got a lot of anxiety around anything that involves balancing. And these children quite often feel really, really unstable on the toilet, particularly when they're smaller. If their feet don't touch the ground, if they're worried they're going to fall into the toilet, falling down the hole. And again, if you're using something like a toilet ring reducer, quite often these can wobble about, and just that little movement will really panic somebody who's got a movement sensitivity, and they'll be very scared that they might actually fall off or fall in. And again, this might make them hesitant and not want to use the toilet if they're scared and they don't trust it and they don't feel safe on it. And again, a lot of these children, because they're anxious about the movement, naturally your body tends to tense up when you're worried, and obviously to use the toilet you need to be fairly relaxed, and if you're tense it's going to make it much, much harder to empty your bladder and your bowel effectively. So what can be done to help? First thing to do is to get a really sturdy toilet step, and just be aware, because I think a lot of the toilet steps for children that are available on the market tend to be quite flimsy. They can be, they're designed to be light so children can move them easily, but it does mean that they can easily be kicked or moved. And for these children, we need something that's super, super stable so that they feel safe. So something that we quite often recommend in OT is using a bath step instead, because this is really sturdy, it's really big, it gives you enough space to stand up and to turn around without it wobbling or fear that you're going to fall off, and that can be really, really helpful. But again, as it says on the slide, actually it's really important for all children to have a toilet step, and that's because if your feet are dangling when you're using the toilet, it's really, really hard to push to open your bowels effectively. So make sure that your children's feet are not dangling, even if they've not got a movement sensitivity. It's really important. The other thing that can be helpful is something called a family toilet seat. So there's a picture of it down here, and that's one where the smaller seat is part of the toilet seat itself. It's got a big one, it's got a small one, and it's got a lid. And because it's all one unit, it doesn't wobble in the same way. And again, children can do it themselves, and not worry that they haven't put it on properly. Just make sure that you get one where the seat is near the children's seat has got the hole near the front, so that they're still able to reach the step, because some of them are a little bit too far back. So just have a little look at the design. If your child's really, really anxious, it might be helpful even to have a toilet frame around your toilet, so they've got something that they can hold on to. If you find that they're sort of grabbing at the bath, the sink, the radiator, whatever's around them, it might be something to think about. And again, you can get something called a toilet ladder, which I'm sure many of you have seen, and this kind of combines all of these elements together. So it's got handles, it's got a ring reducer, and it's got a big wide step as well. But again, if children are really, really sensitive to movement, this might not be quite sturdy enough. You might have to try it and see. The other thing that can be really helpful for children who are really scared of falling into the toilet, and again, I've worked with children who've been really scared that they'll go out to sea if they fall into the toilet, because they've been told the water goes to the sea eventually. So things like having a portable bidet insert, which you can buy from care suppliers online, and if you look at the resources section at the end, it tells you where you can buy these. And I think just because it removes that hole, it can just help children to feel a lot more relaxed and to feel safe, and that can stop any sort of avoidance around using the toilet. So it's not just children who've got movement sensitivity who often find toileting difficult. A lot of children who've got touch sensitivity also really try and avoid aspects of the toilet. So it might be that they don't like to sit on the toilet seat because they don't like the feel of it on their bare skin. Or it could be that they really don't want to wipe after using the toilet because they're really worried about getting their hands soiled, and are just really anxious about getting any poo or anything like that on them. So it's thinking about what can be done to help. And I think the first thing if you've got a child who doesn't like to sit on the toilet, if they're able to actually explain to you what it is about the toilet that they don't like, that can be really, really helpful. If they're not able to, it might be more just sort of having to just watch and do a little bit of detective work. But again, it's just thinking about what type of seat you've got, because different kinds of seat feel different. So if it's they don't like it because it feels cold, then maybe look at something like a different seat, like a wooden seat, which don't tend to be as cold as the plastic ones, or a resin seat. Again, if they don't worry that they feel their skin sticks to it, you can always get, if it's scratchy, there's all different things that that children can feel if they're super sensitive to touch that you just wouldn't think about. And again, you can get things like disposable, either disposable or washable toilet seat covers. If they'd rather sit on something that has more fabric, things like that are out there, and can be purchased easily online. And some children, I've known some children who are quite happy to stand at the toilet. So, boys quite happy to stand and have a wee, but they really don't want to sit down on the toilet, so they try and use the toilet while standing up, which again really doesn't work very well. So again, these are more designed for adults, but you can get sort of special stools for people who prefer to squat over the toilet rather than sit on it. And an older child will probably manage with this. For a younger child, I maybe would look at some of the things we suggested on the last slide. So maybe look at those bath steps, because the beauty of those is that you can buy like extra sections to build them up and up, so you can make it really high and then maybe have a frame so that they can sort of crouch over the toilet but not stand on the seat, because obviously that's not good for the toilet or for them, and try and use it that way. So the other thing to do, if you've got children who are really scared of wiping, and you've got to the stage where they're getting old enough that really you want them to be doing this themselves. So I think building confidence with wiping skills is a really good start, because if they really don't feel they can wipe properly, they're going to really avoid it because they're really worried about it. So you can always use something called a backwards chaining technique. And this is where the adult who's supporting starts the task and the child does the very final bit of it. So with bottom wiping, you'd pretty much do the job for them until they were practically clean, and then you'd get them to do the last bit. So they're not really going to get messy at that stage. They're just checking to see that they're clean, basically, and it's just going to help them to learn how to reach, how to do the action, and then gradually you'd get them to do, you do a little bit less of the task and they do a little bit more of it. So rather than just doing a final check, you'd maybe, they might need to do a wipe and then a check, and then you'd be going backwards and backwards until they can do it by themselves. The other thing you can do as well is, if they're in the bath, they can practice just cleaning the bottom with a flannel, so they're again practicing reaching round, and practicing how much pressure they need to use, because again, some children don't press on very hard. Some children will press really hard and they might make themselves sore. So things like how much pressure to use and how far to reach round can be practiced when you're not actually on the toilet, and that can be really helpful. So if you've got a child who will tolerate wearing gloves, and it's getting things on their hands that they're really scared about, that can be really helpful, just to sort of break that cycle of anxiety and to get them engaged in the task a little bit more. So having a box of disposable gloves in the toilet that they can use is a good way forward, but only if they can tolerate the feel of the gloves. And again, you might want to get some that haven't got powder on, because that might be worse for some children to cope with. So thinking now about children who've got noise sensitivity, again, the main noises that they're going to be scared of in the toilet will be anxiety about the noise of the flush. But again, when you're out and about or at school, the main anxiety nowadays is usually hand dryers, because the hand dryers these days are very, very noisy and they're very loud. And if you remember back to when we talked about what triggers more anxiety and more panic, it's usually when things are unexpected and sudden. And obviously when you're in the toilet and suddenly the hand dryers are going to go on loudly without any warning, that's really likely to trigger quite a big panic for your child. So again, it's very common for children who've got noise sensitivity to really try and avoid using the toilet at school if there's a hand dryer, or just not wanting to use any toilets when they're out and about. So if you're at home and it's more working on the flush, again, it's just trying to make it predictable for your child. So if you close the toilet lid first, it's just going to muffle the sound a little bit. And again, if you're just counting 3, 2, 1, flush, or something similar to that, just to make it predictable for them, that's going to help a little bit. It's going to stop the panic because it's expected, so they know what's happening. And again, if they don't want to be by the toilet, maybe just get them to stand in the bathroom door to start off with, so they're near to the sound, they're being exposed to it, but they're not directly near to it, and they feel that they can get away if they want. And again, just gradually, it's getting them used to the sound. I would try and get them over time to stand a little bit nearer and a little bit nearer. And eventually I'd be trying to get them to flush it themselves if that was something they felt they could do. So I think my main advice when you're going out and about would be to purchase a radar key online. So this is a special key that allows you entrance into the accessible toilets. And it's just a little bit easier to control the environment in these toilets because you haven't got people outside, who are using the hand dryers and things like that. So I think it doesn't cost very much money. And again, look at the resources section for details about buying that. And then when you can go in as well, quite often if you look at the hand dryers, you can see there's an isolator switch. Excuse me. And you can actually switch that off. So again, you're not going to suddenly, especially if it's movement, if it's movement sensor, quite often if you just accidentally, go near the hand dryer, you can set it off, turn it off at the isolator switch, and you know that it's not going to go off accidentally, and you can reassure your child. I think the last thing to do as well is just consider ear defenders for going to the toilet if they're really, really anxious about that. So the last sort of sensitivity that I want to think about in relation to toileting is children who've got a really active and acute sense of smell, because again, children who've got a really acute sense of smell are going to really struggle to tolerate as well toilet smells in general, but also strong smelling cleaning products. And again, this is probably going to be worse when you're out and about, because nowadays a lot of public toilets tend to have very strong industrial air fresheners, and again they just sort of squirt out unexpectedly, so there's suddenly a very strong smell, and you haven't really got any control over the situation. So the main thing to do to try and help is to give your child a sense of control, because again, when you've got sensitivity, if you're feeling more in control of the situation, you feel better armed and equipped in order to deal with it. So again, if you're at home, rather than using sort of stronger bleaches and harsh smelling chemicals, maybe to look for some, or air fresheners, maybe to look for some natural products. So natural air fresheners or something like an essential oil diffuser might be a little bit better tolerated. And again, if you can involve them in choosing, and they can decide which smells they can tolerate, which ones they can't tolerate, then that might be helpful as well. So again, when you're out and about, it's just thinking about what you can have so that they can have some control, and they've got something else that's got a different smell on it that they can smell whenever there's a smell that they don't like. So again, either you could have an old-fashioned cloth handkerchief and put a few drops of either perfume or an essential oil that's safe for your child, just so they've got something that they can hold to their nose and smell, just to mask that public toilet smell. And again, you can get all sorts of products nowadays that you can put essentials oils in, so you can get bead bracelets that the oil sinks into. You can get little pendants where they've got like a little oil diffuser on them. And again, that might be, I wouldn't recommend that for young children, but I think that might be something that would be useful for older children. Or again, at the minute with wearing a mask in public, a lot of children are finding that they can tolerate school smells that they found difficult when they're out and about or in school a lot better than they could previously. So again, maybe think about having something like one of those neck, like on the picture here, one of those neck bands that you can actually pull up over your nose, maybe put a nice smell on that as well. And I think when people aren't wearing masks as much in public, something like that still looks fairly appropriate as you're going around, and it just gives you something that you can do and that sense of control that should help with children. So next I want to talk about children who've got reduced body awareness. And again, we spoke about this a little bit in relation to touch and wiping before. So children who've got reduced body awareness find it hard to feel where their body parts are in relation to another. They might struggle to feel where they are, how they're moving. So it's difficult then for them to reach around and tell that they're reaching the right part of their bum in order to wipe it. They also really struggle sometimes to know how much pressure to use, as we were saying before. So either they might press really, really hard with the risk of making themselves sore, or they might just rub the toilet paper really lightly over themselves. That isn't going to have any effect whatsoever. The other thing, again, because children who've got reduced body awareness really struggle to grade force, so they can be quite heavy-handed, and they might really struggle to tear the toilet roll along the perforations, and just be either ripping it or not ripping it hard enough to break it. And again, these children as well sometimes really struggle to isolate different muscle groups, so because you can't feel your body very effectively, you can't feel which muscles you need to use. So again, obviously, when we're going to the toilet, you need to use muscles in order to do that, and children quite often isolate the muscles around their stomach that they need in order to push. So if we think about things that might help them, so again, if you visit ROT website, there's some body awareness games and games which encourage reaching around the body ideas on there. As we said before, try using a flannel or a sponge in the bath or shower, just so that you can practice how hard you need to press. And again, as a parent or a carer, you can demonstrate how hard to press, and they can practice on an arm, and then they can try it on their bum afterwards. Again, some children, it can be helpful to encourage, if they struggle to isolate those pushing muscles and they struggle to empty their bladder or bowel fully, actually introducing some pushing, so something where you have to blow, can really help the pushing action. So again, things like blowing either balloons or blowing windmills round, blowing bubbles, all of these things, the actual blowing action helps them to push. Just I would say, as a word of warning, really, really helpful to have a basket of specific toilet time toys which are kept in the bathroom, just so that they're kept separate from any of the other ones, because you don't want them to get mixed in with the rest of the toys and your child get confused about it. So again, for children who really struggle to tear the toilet paper, again, this is something that for older children might really affect their ability to use the toilet independently and affect their confidence. So either you could think about having, you can buy those sort of single sheet dispensers that you see in public toilets for home if you look online, or again, they could make themselves a little basket of pre-torn paper, because this is them learning the skill and practicing, but they make it when they're not actually using the toilet and just have that little basket in there for them to use when they need it. This is the end of the sensory needs and toileting presentation. Thank you very much for watching.